Okay, hello everyone. Thank you all so much for being here in person, and thank you to all of the people on Zoom right now. I don't know if everybody realizes, but we had over 100 in-person registrants and over 150 virtual observers. And right now we're already almost close to 100 people observing. It is such an incredible turnout on behalf of the Philadelphia Bar Association. So I want to personally say thank you for showing up for this important program. My name is Kathy Jaffari, and I have the privilege of serving as Chancellor of the Philadelphia Bar Association this year. I also see my Chancellor-elect in the room, Ezra Wilgerlanter. Thank you for being here today. And I want to acknowledge my Vice Chancellor, Christine Callalang, who hopefully will be here later this afternoon. We recently wrote an article for the Bar Reporter at the Philadelphia Bar Association, and we realized just 26 years after the Constitution of the United States was ratified, the Philadelphia Bar Association was born. For 223 years, the association has upheld the values of protecting the rule of law and defending our democracy. And we will not stop, nor will we be stopped. As we move through 2025, we are finding the power of our voice to stay true to our mission, to serve the profession and the public by promoting justice, professional excellence, and respect for the rule of law. We are doing this by trying to create opportunities like this one for lawyers and legal professionals to leverage their influence to meet this moment in service to our democracy. It is imperative that we protect the rule of law and access to justice. Oh.
If you go up to my room, there should be a pair of socks on the ground.
Let's make sure people get muted. Are you in the room? So you guys have, yeah. Thank you. All right. Technology is a good thing, and we will work with it. It is imperative that we protect the rule of law and access to justice. And in doing so, we will support our mission, the values that we have by fostering the understanding of, involvement in, and access to the justice system. So we have 3 ways that you can lean on the Bar Association at this time. First, to be the convener. One of the Bar Association's greatest strengths is encompassing the legal professionals from across the city, including different practice areas, firms, experience levels. We value the contribution and viewpoints that every member brings to the table. And we are committed to creating those tables like today, where we can all convene, support each other, our clients, and the profession. Second, to be the communicator. We make our voices heard through resolutions, statements, and even amicus briefs. And we've created a page on the association's website that will aggregate the Know the Law documents from area law firms and the city's legal service agencies. You will actually receive all of the information regarding the website and all of the documents after this program. And finally, we want to support the community by being the collaborator. We will collaborate with different partners in disseminating useful information, promoting opportunities to engage in volunteer or pro bono work. And really, this is important in today's world. Find opportunities to donate financially to support the work. So, welcome to the first in our series of Meeting the Moment in 2025. This one is focused on immigration. In a period of great uncertainty and struggle, we are proud to provide an update on the state of the law and the impact of new policies at the federal level on our city's legal service agencies and immigration attorneys and clients that they serve. I'd like to thank today's organizers, Brian Kaluski, Lisa Swaminathan, Amal Bass, Debbie Gross, and our Immigration Law Committee co-chairs, Jonathan Grode and Mary Ciccarelli. A huge shout out to Ballard Spar, one of my former homes, and it's wonderful to be here again, for hosting us, and the Bar Association staff, as always, for helping to plan this event. Finally, I'd like to thank our speakers, Representative Mary Gay Scanlon, Anuj Gupta, President and CEO of the Welcoming Center, Jonathan Grode, U.S. immigration lawyer, Green and Spiegel, Katharyn Ivera Christian Voit, Special Counsel, Duane Morris, and Cathryn Miller-Wilson, Executive Director of HIAS-PA. To start our program, I am honored to introduce Representative Scanlon, a longtime member of our community and representative of Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District since 2019. I'm excited to hear from her what she's doing on the ground and what she is seeing on the ground in Washington, D.C. And it really is a privilege for us to have you here, Representative. Following our fireside chat, after we hear some words from the representative, our panelists will discuss what they are seeing in their respective practices in the immigration field and providing a call of action to all of us on how we can serve if you wish to do so. Now, on to our keynote speaker, Representative Scanlon. Prior to her election to the U.S. House of Representatives, Representative Scanlon worked as National Pro Bono Counsel here at Ballard Spar, where she directed and supervised more than 600 lawyers across 15 offices, providing, listen to this, more than 50,000 hours of pro bono legal services annually. And I can attest to the fact that it was under her leadership that I could do all that I did in my pro bono service. So I would like to personally thank you publicly for your commitment in providing the opportunities for us to provide pro bono service. Representative Scanlon also served as an attorney at the Education Law Center, president of her local school board, and co-chair of the Voting Rights Task Force of the Association of Pro Bono Counsel. She is past recipient of the Philadelphia Bar Association's Fidelity Award for her work as co-chair of the association's Commission for Children at Risk. She was also recognized with the Education Law Center's Education Champion Award and the University of Pennsylvania Law Alumni Society's Howard Lesnick Pro Bono Award. And near and dear to my heart, the Support Center for Child Advocates Distinguished Child Advocate Award. I learned from the best here. She has served on many boards as well as in positions with our very own Bar Association. In Congress, Representative Scanlon serves as the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Constitution and Limited Government, as well as the Subcommittee on Administrative State, Regulatory Reform, and Antitrust. We'll work on the title, right? Okay. These are under the House Judiciary Committee. That's the key, member of the House Judiciary Committee. She also serves as the ranking member of the Subcommittee of Rules and Organization of the House under the House Committee on Rules. I have an entire page of the many caucuses, I will not read them, that you serve on. But what I do want to say, Representative Scanlon, thank you for your service to our country. Thank you for your service to our community. Please join me in providing a warm welcome to our representative.
Good afternoon. It is, of course, a pleasure to join my former colleagues here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you as we are at this critical juncture in our nation's history, I believe. I want to thank our panelists for the important work that they do and for their collaboration with me, both in the past and in the present. Today's event, I know, has been planned to address immigration, one of the Trump administration's top targets, but I think we will probably get into as well some of the other activities that have gone on in the last month, because otherwise we would be missing the moment, and we do want to meet it. As you all know, shortly after taking office, the president's first priority was to issue a slew of politically motivated executive orders designed to sow cruelty and confusion in our immigration system, not unlike what he did the first time he was in office, but this time perhaps on steroids. His administration's illegal federal funding freeze put many critical resources, including funding for immigration legal services and refugee resettlement, into limbo. A month into the administration, we're seeing the impact of these extremist policy shifts. The Department of Justice is directing staff and resources away from their work to fight crime and terrorism and into immigration enforcement, threatening the agency's ability to actually keep Americans safe. As the president turns his back on our Afghan allies and those fleeing real life-threatening persecution and disaster across the globe, he's opened his arms to the only refugees he seems to find acceptable, those from South Africa who look and sound like Elon Musk. ICE, desperate to make as many arrests as possible because they now have quotas to meet, has unlawfully detained U.S. citizens in their sweeps. According to the administration's own documents, individuals classified as nonviolent and low risk with little to no criminal records are being sent to Guantanamo. Immigration detention facilities are above their maximum capacity, and now there's reporting that federal prisons are being used to detain immigrants as they await processing. As our immigrant communities across the country are on high alert, we've seen disturbing instances, including here in Philadelphia, of men being arrested for impersonating ICE agents, vigilantes who are harassing and assaulting people they suspect of being undocumented. This is what happens when people who are supposed to be leaders conflate reality with reality TV. I know many of us are feeling the sense of chaos that this administration has come to represent. For those of us who've worked on immigration cases, we know that our system is broken and has been for a very long time. It's vastly outdated and underfunded for the world we live in today. But it's incredibly disheartening to see cynical politicians use those issues as a way to sow anger and resentment, demonizing our immigrant communities. In the district I represent in this region, 11 to 13% of the people who live in the Philadelphia region are foreign born, and they have a variety of immigration statuses, whether they are naturalized citizens, whether they are in the process somewhere, and some are undocumented. Many families have a mix of people in those various statuses in their homes. So the fear that we see being sown by this administration has a lot of tentacles throughout our community. So we, of course, want the process to work better, but the president's agenda is not the way to do that. Already, we're seeing the courts push back on this administration's most outrageous policies. Over 50 legal challenges have been filed to the immigration aspects alone. That includes suits concerning attacks on sanctuary jurisdictions, the right to seek asylum at the southern border, access to counsel for those detained at Guantanamo, the legal orientation program and immigration court help desk, challenges regarding the refugee admissions program, where we have many organizations in this community that are contractually obligated to provide refugee resettlement services. They then bill the administration for services already provided, and we've seen that funding frozen. So we're seeing impacts on employees in our district, in addition to the refugees who are already here, having been vetted for years. There are also suits involving the expansion of expedited removal, the discontinuation of the CBP One app, which is actually how people could get in line. We hear all this talk about get in line, follow the rules. These people are trying to follow the rules, and the rules are being pulled out from under them. And of course, we've seen suspension of a policy prohibiting immigration enforcement in sensitive locations like houses of worship and schools and hospitals. That's a common sense policy to make sure people are getting the care and the support that they need, and that children are not being traumatized. The attempt to overturn birthright citizenship guaranteed by the 14th Amendment has been blocked by 4 federal judges. Nonetheless, we'll be having a hearing in the subcommittee on the Constitution. Its proper name is the Constitution and Civil Rights and Liberties, but we need another election to rename it. So several of the president's other top priorities have been stopped, at least for now. There are over 74 lawsuits involving the orders that have come out in the past few weeks. And if you're looking for a tracker, there's an organization that says justsecurity.org has a tracker. I know that this event was planned at the launch of the second Trump administration when it was clear that one of the administration's top targets would be to launch an immigration offensive. But I would be remiss in meeting this moment if I didn't address the escalating dangers of this administration's attacks on the rule of law and our constitutional order. We've already seen this administration question the legitimacy of judicial oversight on its activities and to make a corrupt quid pro quo deal, such as moving to drop the federal corruption charges against the mayor of New York in exchange for political favors. And I believe the hearing on that is right this moment, 2 p.m. in New York. This is a president who's wasted no time trying to silence the people whose job it is to hold him and his billionaire buddies accountable. That includes firing government watchdogs, at least 18 independent inspectors general at federal agencies, Senate confirmed bipartisan appointees at the FEC and the NLRB, dozens of career prosecutors at the Department of Justice, and potentially thousands of Federal Bureau of Investigation agents who were tasked with investigating the January 6th attack on the US Capitol and other efforts to overturn the 2020 election. As members of the Philadelphia Bar Association and the heirs to the mantle of Andrew Hamilton, the original Philadelphia lawyer who defended the free press and John Peter Zenger from persecution by a corrupt royal governor, we should be particularly offended by this administration's attempts to silence the free press, whether it's the White House ban on AP reporters because that news agency has challenged the president's unilateral attempt to rename the Gulf of Mexico, or the eviction of mainstream news organizations from their Pentagon offices to make room for right-wing outlets, or the filing of lawsuits and reinstatement of FCC complaints that had already been resolved against broadcast networks and newspapers because Trump didn't like their coverage of the recent presidential election. I think you understand the urgency of this moment. Our country is built on the rule of law, not the rule of a king, and the principle that no one is above the law. But this administration's actions fly in the face of that American tradition. The president is testing those fundamental boundaries. He's challenging the courts, Congress, and our very Constitution. He's undermining the people's power by unilaterally dismantling government agencies and withholding funding that their elected representatives in Congress have approved. Let me give you a specific example or two. In the past few years, Congress has passed multiple bipartisan bills to expand eligibility for veterans benefits and to address both their exposure to toxic substances and issues concerning mental health and high suicide rates. So there have been additional resources and a crisis hotline. Trump's hiring freeze and firing over 1,000 VA employees last week is directly impacting the delivery of those very recently congressionally approved and funded services. The Trump administration is destroying the merit-based civil service system that ensures our government functions with the public interest, not politics, in mind. In addition to firing and reclassifying civil servants without cause, this administration has attempted to fire the watchdog who defends the civil service system and has instructed the Department of Justice to refuse to defend the civil service law itself. And he's selling out our Democratic allies abroad. The president is doing all this with the hope that the accountability system enshrined in our Constitution will not hold. But organizations like the Philadelphia Bar Association have an important role in fighting back against this assault on the rule of law. Every lawyer here has taken an oath to support and defend our Constitution, and I'm asking you to use your voices and your expertise to defend our democracy in the courts and in educating the public about our constitutional system, how it's under attack, and why it matters. I hope to have your partnership in that work as we face these challenging times together, because I know how essential your collaboration will be in protecting our core American values. We must stand up to this administration's attempts to undermine our Constitution And we can see the playbook. It's all been laid out in the Project 2025 manifesto. We are seeing that happening in real time. So we have to stand up to the administration's attempts to undermine the Constitution. We have to uphold the separation of powers that puts important checks on the presidency. No matter how dark it seems right now, we must always strive for a more fair and a more just America. So I want to thank the bar for everything it's doing, what its individual members are doing, and thank you again for having me here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I have to say what I really appreciated, Representative Scanlon, is no matter how dark it is, we can find the light, and we can find the light together through conversation and through dialogue, and the key is action. And so we're just gonna really have a conversation. Our representative has graciously offered to answer some questions as well, given time. So feel free to ask the representative some questions, but we're gonna actually start with the very first question, which is all about the rule of law and how you were sharing with us that this is really our duty. I mean, we did take an oath to protect the rule of law. So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, how can Congress protect the rule of law?
Well, we are at this moment where the Constitution set up a very specific system of checks and balances. The problem is we have a two-party system and one of the parties is not acting at this point in time. So, we have used the impeachment mechanism, but the Senate didn't get the memo. So Congress could stand up right now and pass some laws to stop what's going on. Legislation is being introduced kind of on a daily basis as we see each new incursion. So there are bills to keep Elon Musk, who we're not sure whether he's a special agent, a special employee, a special advisor, or what. It depends on any given day, apparently, at the White House. But we also don't know what his, Doge bros or whatever they're being called are. What's their role and why do they get to invade people's personal data, their financial data, et cetera? So Congress could quickly pass laws to address that, but we need at least 3 Republicans in the House to vote for the American people. We need a few more in the Senate. So that would be the quickest path forward. That not occurring immediately. We're using every tool that we have in the minority to speak out, to have town halls. I had a town hall with 9,000 people on the line last night. And, that's extraordinary. We don't usually get 9,000 people on the line, but that's what my colleagues across the country are seeing every day as we reach out. We are using the hearings, which we don't get to call the topic, but we can certainly use the bully pulpit when we have it.
Okay.
And that's where I'm really looking forward to having Jamie Raskin as the ranking member on Judiciary this term. He talk about meeting the moment. I mean, he showed us on the Oversight Committee last term that he really is quite masterful at standing up to the lies and the misinformation and, being able to stand up to some of the crazy that's being thrown out into our public discourse and being able to try to provide truth and to be able to punch back, because quite frankly, that is important in this element. So he's convening us regularly as we prepare for hearings, et cetera.
Okay. And that's another way of saying it. That's the form of defending our democracy. Right? In the effort, when you talked about, in your words, when you were sharing upholding the separation of powers, that is really, the way to defend our democracy through those hearings. So having those town halls and 9,000 people show up, the real question is, what advice do you have for the constituents on how anybody can express their views on what's going on? And I guess just to be blunt, do the phone calls matter? Do they help? Do they make a difference?
Yeah, they do make a difference. And we've seen that, I mean, as recently as 2 years ago after the Uvalde shooting, when there was such a push to have some common sense gun safety legislation, we got something. For the first time in 30 years, we were able to pass something. And it was because mostly Republican senators, were getting so many calls from their constituents saying, you have to do something. So people who for decades had resisted any forward action, they decided they had to move. We're
Wow.
seeing it already with respect to the orders that are coming out of the White House.
Okay.
So that funding freeze, they walked it back. They haven't walked it back completely, but we did see that it was walked back once it started hitting people on the ground and they were complaining to their representatives. So thus far, we haven't seen a lot of open dissent from our Republican colleagues, but we've been hearing that they're kind of back channeling and saying, you have to help us out on this. I mean, it is a big mistake when you withhold FEMA funding from fire companies in Pennsylvania, because fire
Right.
companies rule Pennsylvania. There's a lot of them, and they are not usually Democrats. So
the calls are making a
so
difference?
the calls do make a difference.
Any-
Calls,
any-
letters.
I was going to
Yeah.
ask, any other recommendations of what people should or can be doing?
Well, we know from Steve Bannon, who's one of the president's advisors, that this is a purposeful strategy to flood the zone with just so many things at once that people are overwhelmed and feel paralyzed. I've certainly felt that way a few times recently. I mean, you just can't process the fire hose of information, but it is a strategy to overwhelm people and to hopefully get them so sick and tired they walk away. So I think staying in it, if you have to pick an issue, you have to take time out and go see a Super Bowl parade, do things that help you find joy, but stick with it, keep calling, show that you're not going away. I know the figure we got a couple weeks ago as the first news broke about Musk trolling through the Treasury Department's data. Usually Congress gets 40 calls a minute on an average day. Congress was getting 1,600 calls a minute. I mean, things were melting down.
Okay.
And some folks who weren't liking the message they were receiving were rolling all the calls to voicemail.
That's what
folks
we heard,
listened.
actually.
Yes, our folks listen. Charnay's with me today. Our folks have been very busy, but the calls do make a difference and they track. And the point is that our elected representatives have to be more concerned about what their constituents think than what the guy in the White House thinks.
Got it. So you already shared an extensive amount, which we're so grateful for, about the changes in the effect of the changes in the immigration policies on Philadelphia. So I think I'd actually like to hone in on, what do you feel is the most important message to convey to the immigrant communities or organizations that serve them? And you touched on schools. We've been talking internal, in the Bar Association about employers and the loss of employees, that they need to service their businesses. Advice or message that you would give?
Well, we have great organizations in this region who've
We
been
do?
really, really helpful
Yes.
in this. HIAS and Nationality Service Center and Welcome Center, ACLU, they have been everywhere, helping with Know Your Rights programs so that people who may have different immigration statuses understand what their rights are, but also so employers and school districts and businesses know how they can be either part of the solution or what their legal obligations are, knowing that they don't have to let ICE in unless they have a warrant signed by a judge. Things like, knowing that there are public spaces and non-public spaces. I do think an overall important message is that a lot of this is reality show. They sent Dr. Phil out on their raids in Chicago. They just want as much attention to the cruelty and the chaos as they can get, because literally an objective for this administration is to force people to self-deport. Just that they're so scared, they say it's easier for me to leave and not fight this anymore. Even though many of the people who are being impacted do have some status, they've just been waiting, sometimes decades, for the immigration courts to get to their case. So I think there isn't enough money to undertake the kind of mass deportation that the president has suggested.
Okay.
So people knowing their rights, being in their community, trying to maintain some calm is really, really important.
Actually, I really appreciate that last statement. One thing we've been talking about is, how do you maintain the calm when you're drinking from the fire hose, right? So we will try to do that at the Philadelphia Bar Association. Actually, one of the questions that we had talked about, I was going to ask later on, but I want to ask now, and that is, what is your view of members of the current administration threatening those who intend to hold Know Your Rights events? Do you have any advice for us? Because we want to hold Know
Sure.
Your Law events. We want to hold Know Your Rights events. And actually, you might appreciate this, Representative Scanlon. One of the things we're thinking about is it's not just know your rights, it's know the law.
Right.
When we're
Right.
trying to defend democracy
Well,
and respect for the rule of law.
and part of this whole exercise is, where are the allies? And
yeah.
so, the school districts are allies because they want to protect the children in their care. The hospitals are allies because they want to make sure that we don't have people, with serious medical problems in our community. The courts and law enforcement are our allies because they don't want crimes going unreported because people are afraid to turn someone in or to file a complaint.
Mhm.
So there are allies in a lot of different places. As we're seeing these indiscriminate deportation sweeps happen, we're ending up with allies from American citizens who are being impacted. You talk about folks in the immigration or immigrant community knowing their rights. Americans need to know their rights, and that their rights are impacted when we see this incursion upon due process. It affects all of us. And I think that's something that, it gets a little wonky when you talk about the rule of law and due process. And that's where lawyers, I think, can be helpful, explaining that when you let one thing slip, all of a sudden we end up on a slippery slope, and Americans' rights are being impacted as well.
We will take that to heart and figure that out. So thank you for that. Okay.
If I can just
Yeah,
add one more
please.
thing, you mentioned that people are being threatened. Some of the people who are being threatened are my colleagues in Congress.
Oh, let's talk about that.
Members of Congress who are holding Know Your Rights seminars, and people are now threatening to impeach them, which is not a thing.
Okay.
You cannot impeach
Again, we got to
a
teach
member
that.
of Congress. Yes, apparently we need to teach members of Congress that, or threatening to deport them, even if they are citizens or naturalized citizens. So again, that comes back to a very Philadelphia concern, which would be the First Amendment, and not being silenced. You have the right to speak about things that are true. If anyone does try to silence anyone for doing a Know Your Rights presentation, I hope we have a lot of hands going up and saying, I'll defend them. Because that is, an assault upon a basic American freedom.
Thank you for that. Okay, let's talk a little bit, if we can we do federal funds a little bit?
Sure.
With the administration trying to block the distribution of federal funds, and I'll announce it a little bit later, but one of our next programs is actually on the blockage of federal funds in the Meeting the Moment conversation. We know, and you have shared with us, partially stopped by the courts. What do you think will happen with federal funding and how it'll impact Philadelphia? What are you seeing maybe on the ground in Washington that you can share with us, or within your community that you represent?
Well, when this funding freeze came out, immediately we heard from domestic violence agencies, we heard from fire companies, we heard from immigration resettlement agencies, we heard from sewer projects and roads and bridges projects. I mean, the folks who are doing this are doing it indiscriminately. They don't know what they're doing. They are not familiar with government. So even though they walked back some of this, the funding, you don't just turn federal funding off and on like it's a faucet. And we know that Governor Shapiro was forced to file a lawsuit to try to get some funding turned back on that hasn't been turned back on yet. I think it's 1.3 billion.
Yeah.
Has still not been restored. And of course, there's all the costs. I mean, for people who claim to come to this as businessmen who, know how to run a business, they're certainly doing an awful lot of wasteful and expensive things by firing critical employees, suspending funding, which then causes people to incur costs and penalties. I mean, it's not efficient.
It's not efficient.
It's dog-like, but not efficient.
Agreed. Okay. I want to touch on one of the questions having to do with attacks on judges and lawyers. What can Congress do to help us support the judicial system? Is there anything?
Well, I mean, Congress can do a lot.
With the votes.
Yes, with the votes. I mean, that becomes the issue.
Right.
we have been trying to do some things over the last couple terms to implement an ethics code for
Yep.
the Supreme Court. It does appear that there needs to be some reform at the Supreme Court, so we get out of this doom loop of whenever someone has to leave the court for whatever reason, it causes a constitutional crisis or crazy jockeying for political power. So there's some very good proposals out there to kind of regularize the process, have an appointment every couple of years, implement like an 18-year term for Supreme Court judges, justices. We are one of the few countries in the world that have lifetime appointments, and it's perhaps something that may have outlived its original usefulness with the ability of people to live so much longer. So I do think there are some basic court reform things that we should be doing.
And maybe that's something at the Bar Association we
That would be
can
great.
look at.
There's some great proposals out there, and we can
Okay.
share some with you.
That would be
Yeah.
really helpful, because that's for the final question I have in our chat is, what do you think the best things are that we as an association can do to protect vulnerable communities in the Philadelphia area?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of pro bono work up and running. I know the agencies here are masterful at it and really good at collaborating with the private bar and giving members of the private bar the tools they need to go represent folks. So yes, there will be individual work. There will be class actions. There will be suits by organizations that are getting stiffed on federal funding that they have contracts to receive. So it feels like there will be a lot of different areas where people can lean in, but I do think the role of education is really, really important in helping people understand why incursions in one area, it's not faceless bureaucrats in DC, it's your neighbor, it's, the person who inspects your water to see if there's lead in the pipes, or your food to see if they're contaminated. It's the FAA workers who make our airport run smoothly. I think helping people understand the broad scope of what's happening here, and then relating it back to why is this happening? Well, it's because someone's issuing executive orders that could not pass Congress.
Right.
So that's where Congress does need to step up and make noise. And we're trying to do that by collaborating on litigation. I'm a member of a rapid response and litigation team that
Okay.
got stood up last week. But working with the people like Democracy Forward and the State Democracy Defenders Action Group. I mean, they're two of the lead groups that are doing a lot of the class actions along with unions. But I think it's going to spread as it happens. We haven't seen the full out assault yet on women's reproductive rights, but we know it's coming. So there will be opportunities there to defend those rights and freedoms. So I think it's, an embarrassment of awful riches to pick from. But again, through your faith communities, through your homeowners association, through your swim club, through your PTAs, anything you can do to help people understand just the magnitude of this moment, I think is really important.
Incredibly helpful. Thank you. Should we see if there's a couple of
Sure.
questions? Maybe take one or two questions, please.
Yeah.
So, Schulman, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Assuming there's some rancor within the GOP rank and file over. Assuming there's some rancor within the GOP when it comes to March 14th, which is what the federal funding cliff. The Democratic caucus has some leverage to potentially shut the government down.
No, the
No?
Democratic caucus has leverage to provide a functional budget. If the government shuts down, it's because the Republicans didn't get their act together.
Fair enough.
They've got the trifecta. They can do it if they want.
What are your thoughts on leveraging that tool to stop this train?
So, I mean, there is the funding train that is barreling along, and they are unified on the idea that they want to continue the trillions of dollars worth of tax cuts for billionaires and wealthy corporations. In order to do that, though, within their version of fiscal, responsibility, they want to cut trillions of dollars from Medicaid, from all kinds of social safety net programs and government benefits that people and communities rely upon. So what we are seeing is while they may have the broad outline of agreement, as it's starting to hit home, just as we saw with, the funding cutoffs a couple of weeks ago, and as these layoffs start to roll out, there is starting to be cracks in the surface. When we saw Katie Britt, who did the kitchen response to the State of the Union, when they said that they were going to halt all that funding for NIH, all of a sudden she's saying, whoa, 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 maybe we need to be a little more surgical in these cuts rather than just going willy-nilly. There was a really kind of amazing podcast on The Daily this morning where they were interviewing federal workers who have been let go. And the first guy up is someone with the VA. He's like, I'm a combat veteran. I got hired by the VA. I thought they would come for everyone else before me, but now I'm unemployed. And he also said, they're going to break something they can't fix. And that's, there's a lot of pain and suffering coming, not just for the immigrant community. And we're starting to see those cracks as they talk about, we're going to cut $888 billion from Medicaid. That's one of the target numbers they're throwing around. Well, all of a sudden, some of those New York representatives from swingier districts are saying, wait a minute, 30% of my constituents rely on Medicaid. So, as I said before, these executive orders are things that would not pass Congress on their own. So as they try to get folded into whatever it is they're trying to work through the reconciliation process, I think they're going to see defections.
Yeah.
No, sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
I guess I your hands.
Thank you. Thank you. In terms of hearing from constituents, both you and your Republican colleagues, have there been many responses or input from folks who voted for the president? People like farmers or, the bedrock MAGA voters, have they been making any of their concerns, if they have any, known?
Sure. Well, that's one of the areas where we've started to see some of those fissures forming. So when they suspended USAID funding, so much of that goes to feeding people around the world. And that food is bought from American farmers. So we are already hearing from some of those rural districts, those rural states, again, wait, that's not what we wanted. We wanted you to hurt someone else, not me. So we are hearing that. There is, my office has a page on our website. There's a banner up at the top saying, if you have a story about how these orders are impacting you or our community, please tell us that story so we can share it and elevate it. Obviously, we're keeping people confidential, but all of this has been pitched as big government is bad and we want to be mean to the faceless bureaucrats and the politicians in DC, but the focus has not been on what that really means when it happens in your community. So we are trying to tell those stories. And many of the offices have opened up a website to try to collate that information. And later this afternoon, I'm going to put out some social media posts on additional things that are being recommended. There is a house-wide page now to share that information.
Okay, can we take two more?
Sure.
Okay, Kathy, and then I saw a hand in the back.
Mine's just a quick one. And I'm sure you've probably heard this and seen it. There was a letter in yesterday's Inquirer, I think, or today, but people can't reach Senator McCormick. People are calling and writing. I myself used his scheduler to try to schedule an appointment, got no response, not even a confirmation of receipt. And also Fetterman, we can't get through to him. I had a staff member trying to call him for 2 days straight, specific to a client matter, and just couldn't get through. It wasn't like voicemail or a staffer. It was just, I can't get through. So we have, it seems to me that, it's one thing to contact a legislator, leave a message. They listen, they don't listen, whatever, they do their thing. It's a totally other thing to be elected and drawing a salary from American tax dollars and not answering the phone or writing letters or have staffers. Is there a process to report people like they're not doing their basic function just a basic function. We're not asking you to vote a certain way. I mean, we are,
Yeah.
but we understand that you're going to vote however you're going to vote, but you need to be accessible.
Right.
So
You know, being a member of Congress is kind of like being a partner, lots of egos, not a lot of oversight. 435 different little fiefdoms. So I don't know that there's a particular place to complain other than publicly, in the press, on podcasts, outside offices. And it comes back to not going away because it is kind of this play of trying to just overwhelm people and close people out and exhaust them. Yeah.
and talk about government fraud and waste and
Yeah.
abuse.
Sure.
Our tax dollars going to, I don't know what, some kind of black hole.
Mhm.
Thank you, Kathy.
I have told people that one of the reasons I ran for Congress in 2018 was because 2 years after the election of Trump, there were still people on my regional rail train coming into the city every Tuesday for Tuesdays with Toomey to protest outside his office. That's when I knew this was an enduring movement and that people weren't giving up and going away, and they understood that this was a problem. So I think we need that same kind of energy and commitment, calling every day, speed dialing, pretend that it's Springsteen tickets and just hit redial or, whatever your version, Taylor Swift.
And I have to remember that commitment from you because I remember the night you walked into my office and said,
Oh,
we got to
God.
do this. I got to run.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was incredible. So
A
thank you
fit
for
of
that
madness,
commitment.
But yeah.
Because you have that commitment. One last question, please.
Hi, thank you. So until now, we've been talking about federal government and workers and grants and that sort of thing. I'm curious about the private sector, the non-governmental sector.
Mhm.
This is somewhat speculative, but I've been hearing some talk about it, that the government is going to use anti-terrorism laws to designate private entities as dangers, and it's going to try to seize their assets. It's the next wave or next fear. You hear anything like that, or is this just lawyers talking and it's actually?
I hadn't heard that particular horrible yet, but we're hearing crazier things every day. But maybe then we get the chambers of commerce as our allies. I mean, we are seeing already private organizations, pulling their punches on things like DEI or the media organizations that are settling absolutely frivolous suits with huge payments into Trump's library fund. I mean, so we are seeing some knuckling under. And so I think, it's not beyond reason to think that there may be other efforts to blackmail essentially private businesses. But again, that increases the number of people who are pushing back.
And the Bar Association is working on collaborating with the chamber here in Philadelphia, the Greater Chamber of Commerce. So again, to the extent that the bar can do anything in the conversation, that's what we're striving to do.
And just one other point, you said to get away from the federal. I mean, a big piece of this is we do have state and local government with responsibilities. We have a state constitution that has additional freedoms and rights outlined in it. We've got a big judicial election coming up this year. So these are things, the state legislature, the state courts, the governor's office can all be backstops in some of this, as well as, hopefully making up some of the funding gaps, et cetera. So I think paying attention to the local politics is important too.
Representative Scanlon, thank you.
Thank you.
So much for your time. We know how busy you are. Thank you for your candor, your insight, your time. Again, thank Representative again for joining us today. We are now moving to our panel discussion, which will touch on the businesses and how to help protect the businesses or get the businesses involved in the conversation. So if you want to take a second to stretch your legs, great, but don't move because the panel is coming up here right now. Hopefully folks online are doing well as well. I don't have eyes in the room on that.
Should we send?
No, keep it loose.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Actually,
Yeah.
Everybody's running away.
I did shower.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much. Again, thank you to our representative for being here today and sharing the incredible insights that she provided. I'm actually pleased to introduce today's moderators. I've already named them, but I'll introduce them again. We have Brian Kozalewski. Brian, raise your hand. Thank you. Pro bono counsel at Faegre Drinker. And we have Vic Patel. Vic, raise your hand. Managing attorney at Community Legal Services, the Energy Unit. And I have to say also chair of the Board of Governors at the Philadelphia Bar Association. Please welcome them and over to them.
Thank you, Chancellor, and thank you to Mary Gay Scanlon, Representative Scanlon, for being here. It really is a great opportunity to hear about what's going on in DC and the impact that everything is having on our community. But we wanted to put a panel together today from those of us in the community to talk about what's going on, what activities we can do, and what possible avenues we can have to better support those who are being impacted by this. We have a great panel here, but we're going to start in a unique place because the last question dealt with the private sector and business community. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Grode to talk a little bit about the business sector and go into the impacts that they have there, what can be done, and give a little bit of perspective from that side.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great to be here. Important panel. And, I think what Mary Gay and Katie were talking about is incredibly important because immigration in a lot of ways is a microcosm for what's being experienced on the federal level. What we see happening to our nation, we can see most directly impacted on the immigrants in the community. And what I mean by that is, it doesn't really start with Trump, but it's amplified by Trump, is this concept and notion of congealing power and the ability to change law within the executive branch and neutering the power of Congress. And a lot of these funding things that we're talking about and changes is a tantamount to a second veto power on legislation that's been passed by Congress without a voice for Congress to fight back. That's some of the scariest stuff. A lot of this stuff, what the president does, kind of falls into this bucket of constitutional but stupid. And a lot of what we're seeing with immigration and the ability of the executive branch to use executive orders as a mechanism of changing the immigration system is what we're feeling. And as immigration attorneys, we've almost become numb to the fact that every 4 or 8 years, we're dealing with a completely new set of laws, not because the laws themselves are changing. We haven't had comprehensive immigration reform in decades. Not because the rules are changing, but because the referees are calling the game differently. There's holding on every single play, right? You can always call it. That's what they're being instructed to do. And that goes from the ICE agents all the way down to the people that are prosecuting people here who are without status, to the way the USCIS enforces the laws and the benefits that are provided, to the Department of Labor and the Wage and Hour Division. They're calling the game differently. But we don't really know what those rules are. And that's what's so problematic about it, because they're done either through thinly veiled executive orders that say you must do something, or discussions about priorities on how many people or quotas ICE has to arrest. I mean, there's this number floating around of 75 a day per ICE office. There's 25 ICE offices in the United States. You do the math, there's not enough beds. Our one detention facility in Pennsylvania is already full. Even if you put 30,000 people at Guantanamo Bay, you're not even dipping into the 10 to 15 million people who are here without status. But we have to look at how it affects businesses as well as the individuals. And we have some great colleagues here to talk about the effects on individuals. Anuj and I have had the pleasure of discussing this within communities from a business perspective. But 6.8% of our entire GDP is driven by people without status. 6.8%. We talk about a president who came to power partially on saying we're going to reduce inflation. Not going so well so far. But that was part of the momentum. Everybody was willing to not look at some things because of these things. The reality is if you try to enforce all those laws, the inflation rates are going to go through the roof. Our very supply chain is going to be damaged at its core. And what are employers left to do? What do employers crave more than anything else is consistency and predictability. You're removing predictability by affecting their very labor force. That's the scary part. And that's what we're trying to prepare against. Yes, we want to protect the businesses. They care about the people that work for them. I've heard it firsthand. But business continuity is something that is terrifying. The reality is that there's this cry to do it legally. And Mary Gay, you touched on it a little bit, right? Oh, we'll go back and do it the right way, but we're taking away your tools to do it the right way. If you really take a look at it, there is actually no way to do it correctly. There is no year-round low-skilled visa classification, and there hasn't been. In 1986, there was an attempt through our last comprehensive immigration reform to provide a means for people to work legally in the United States regardless of industry. It failed. It was a small guest worker program. It didn't work. There's been whispers of it over the decades, but the reality is if you're not doing temporary seasonal work, if you're not doing agricultural work on a seasonal basis, there is no way for you to do it here legally. There's no way for an employer to sponsor these people legally. And when you talk about advocacy and allies and making a change by having a large enough voice, my hope is that through all of this trouble, there's enough momentum to say, stop talking about the effects of immigration law, but let's look at the cause and why these problems exist. You can look no further than Kennett Square to see the epitome of the policy problems we have. In Kennett Square, mushroom growing is one of our largest industries in southeastern Pennsylvania. I think it's the second or first largest growing area in the entire country. There's no visa to grow mushrooms. Why? Because it's year-round. It's not seasonal. It's done indoors. And these are the people that are most terrified about what's happening. So what are we doing to help? It's a challenge. You know, a lot of things talk about what to do in case of a raid. You talked about identifying a warrant and knowing whether or not it's a judicial warrant versus something generated by the administration. Putting up areas and designating the difference between public and private space. Having business continuity plans. Talking to your partner and colleagues from your industry and saying, look, I'm here to help you if you get hit. I don't know exactly what you're going to be talking about news, but we had a meeting with some of the restaurant community talking about how to handle somebody coming to their office and whether or not they're engaging in a raid. What does that look like? Versus a designated targeted activity, which has really changed, where they're looking for a criminal individual or somebody that has a final order of removal, which frankly, Biden and Obama before them were seriously trying to engage enforcement activities as well. And how do you handle a warrant looking for a specific person without them doing the sort of like catch methodology, where if they encounter anybody on a particular action, they're going to bring them into custody? You need plans for that. This is the reality of what we're seeing. Now, I agree with Mary Gay Scanlon in that a lot of this is the shock and awe movement, the flooding of executive orders, the loud enforcement actions, the Dr. Phil riding shotgun as they go and do raid activities. It will have to settle. But that doesn't change the fact if you hear of a raid in the Italian market, nobody's there for the next 3 or 4 days. Yeah. Somebody comes and picks somebody up at your business and half of your workforce doesn't show up the next day. How do you protect people that have no mechanism of being protected? And these actions by the administration not only stem to low-skilled labor, but also impact high-skilled labor. The very genesis of our business creation, right? In Philadelphia, we have something special going on. We have, I think it's being called Silicon Valley, right? This is our chant for biotech. This is a haven for those activities. Well, what's different between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0 is that you sort of have this heavy contingent of mainstream development that's standing on stage, $1 trillion between 3 individuals during inauguration were on stage with Trump. And they say they like H-1B. So guess who likes H-1B now, right? But that doesn't mean they're not trying to undercut the legal immigration system by curtailing post-study work permits called OPT. That doesn't mean that they're not installing extreme vetting for visa processing, which sounds like something more from WWE than an act of law. Now, I will say that because this is 2.0 and he sort of knew what he was doing, it's a lot more organized than travel bans that felt like they were written on the back of Denny menus from 2017. It's a lot more forceful and impactful and purposeful. But what we are also seeing is that the Biden administration did a good job of putting a couple little nuggets in there before leaving office by passing some final rules that showed the chessmanship around immigration policy through the executive branch. One of our hardest things with Trump 1.0 was this concept of de novo review. Every petition was being reviewed as if it was there for the first time. And we got some crazy decisions. You know, people that have been here for 7 years going for extensions, all of a sudden having to pack up and leave because of a change in prerogative. Well, Biden slipped in this prior deference concept, which means if it was approved previously for the same job, for the same employer, for the same individual, it should be proved again absent something fraudulent. Didn't get a lot of attention, but makes a big impact as we drive towards consistency. So I know we have a lot of panel with a lot of people that have a lot of things to talk about, but I want you to understand that you will hear a lot about the raids and what's impacting people on a local level, a federal level, and even in some respects an international level, as you saw this sort of little tete-a-tete with Colombia over the return of deportees. But don't forget, as we look to allies and we look to foster change, that sometimes this amount of disagreement and distrust can lead to allies pushing forward something special. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. If we can actually start looking at the cause of our problems within immigration, instead of debating about the effects, we can actually have meaningful change. So that's my hope for the future. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jonathan. And now we're going to take a step back and really try to get some context on what immigration has meant to Philadelphia and a little bit more about the immigrant community. And so Anuj Gupta from Welcoming Center, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thanks. Good afternoon. So I want to just say something about the Bar Association and Kathy's leadership in bringing this event to fruition. I don't know about you, Kathy, but for me, the last month has felt quite lonely. We are seeing leaders and institutions, and I just want to call out my friend, Councilwoman Rulandau, who has been the exception to this. But we've seen leaders and institutions engage in unicorn-like thinking, burying their heads in the sand, thinking that if they ignore this, it will just magically go away. It won't. And to have an institution with credibility, with history, stand up and say what needs to be said meant a great deal. So thank you. And you have to keep doing it. So look, here's the reality. I am not a real lawyer. The last time, and I'm on a panel with some really great lawyers. The last time I practiced law, the congresswoman was my pro bono supervisor. Okay. But I'm going to tell you a quick story about the first matter that she gave to me. And then I want to explain to you what your ability to join in this fight means for this city, for the community that you live in right here, because it is inextricably tied to immigration. And there is no way around that. You cannot bend the numbers towards another argument. So the first matter I get as a young associate here at Ballard, highest case, Congolese woman. She was raped and abducted by a member of the Congolese army, forced into marriage, contracted HIV in the process. She somehow manages to escape, goes through this multi-year ordeal to find her way to the United States. In the process, by the way, gives birth baby daughter who also then contracts HIV. So she is, by the time I'm representing her, she has asylum. And all I'm doing is, it was an adjustment of status representation. And then ultimately applying for green card. And I've been through everything that life could possibly throw at her. And so there would be days, there would be weeks on end where I couldn't get a return call. If I got a hold of her, she would be in this constant fog. I mean, she suffered mental abuse, physical abuse, and she was working part-time hours as a maintenance worker at a local hotel. I think despite the fact that she at least was in a safe environment, she felt no hope for herself and no hope for her daughter. Now, we get through the process, everything's successful. It's actually just a few weeks before I leave Ballard in late 2007 that her green card arrives. So great. Fast forward 10 years later, I never hear, I don't know what happens to her. She's still in Philadelphia. 10 years later, I'm leaving my office at the Reading Terminal Market, running to catch a train, and I hear somebody yell behind me, "Mr. Anuj, Mr. Anuj." And I turn around and it's my client. And she tells me that not only did she just become naturalized, she's now in a supervisory role at the same hotel. And her daughter has just graduated from high school and about to go to college. And the smile that she had on her face, I can't describe to you what that felt like. My point in sharing the story with you is that as members of the bar, whether you specialize in immigration law or not, you have the ability to fundamentally change an individual's life trajectory. In the course of doing that, you will likely change the life trajectory of many other people, because that's the way immigration works. And when you do that, and Philadelphia is the poster child for this, anyone that wants to have a real discussion about what immigration can do for a community needs to come to Philadelphia. Because we proved it here over the last 20 years. But by doing that work on behalf of a client, on behalf of their family members, you can fundamentally alter the trajectory of a community. And so I'm going to give you that context and close with this. I want to take you back 23 years to a city at the turn of this century that, despite the optimism of the Rendell administration and people are starting to feel hopeful about Philadelphia, the numbers here still told a very different story. In the 1990s alone, this city lost 6% of its population. And unlike its peer cities around the country, Boston, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Washington, Atlanta, and go on down the list, we had not regained a position as an immigrant destination. In the 1990s, we were experiencing the largest wave of immigration this nation had seen since the turn of the last century. Philadelphia wasn't seeing any of it. Now, 6% of our less than 6% of our population was foreign born. As the 5th largest city in the country, our total immigration numbers ranked us somewhere in the 20s. And as a result, all of the reasons that people had been leaving our city and jobs had been fleeing our city for 50 years were continuing essentially unabated. Now, in the last 20 years, thanks to organizations like HIAS, like Nationality Services Center, like the Welcoming Center, and just shout out to my friend and predecessor, Peter Gonzalez, who was our CEO for 11 years. Thanks to mayors, thanks to city council members, we have turned that trajectory around. The foreign-born population in Philadelphia now comprises just under 16%. The story, the narrative that's been told about Philadelphia is that we stopped our decline thanks to millennials and empty nesters. Yeah, it's true, they moved into the city. Those numbers are very small and they are on the margin. You cannot rebuild a city the size of Philadelphia through empty nesters and millennials. Bless their heart. It's not possible. In the last 15 years, 100,000 net new foreign-born residents have come to call this city home. And you want to get a sense of their profile? 43% of the foreign-born population in Philadelphia has a bachelor's degree or higher. 45% of the foreign-born population in Philadelphia is now making $50,000 or more. Why does that matter? For the poorest big city in America that is constantly struggling to figure out how to pay their bills, growing our tax base. 36% of, so, and by the way, I'm just citing great numbers that Tom Ginsburg and his team at PU published over the last year. So credit goes where it's due. 36% of sole proprietors in the city of Philadelphia are now immigrant owned. 1 in every 5 workers in the Philadelphia economy is now foreign born. And the same story can be told in Chester County. 60% of the population growth that county has experienced has been through immigration. Same story in Montgomery County. And if I had the numbers in front of me with Delco and Bucks, I guarantee it would tell a similar story. And here's the most compelling statistic that our friends at Pew gave us last year. The city of Philadelphia is expected to grow back to 1.8 million people by 2050. We have not been at that number since the early 1960s. During that time, the native-born population is actually expected to decline. What does that mean? All of our future growth, all of it is through immigration. And so if you believe that the trajectory this city has been on is a good thing, if you believe that having businesses in your communities is a good thing, if you believe that having employers with jobs that they can fill is a good thing, if a tax base matters to you so we can pay for libraries and schools and streetlights and parks, I've got news. You don't have a choice. It is only going to happen through immigration. We have this extraordinarily acute demographic inversion in this country, where we have a lot more native-born generations up here, and we have very few coming up behind them. And so, yeah, AI can do a lot of things in place of human beings. Can't pay taxes, can't start businesses, can't run factory floors. So I implore you, if you get up in the morning and you say, well, on the immigration thing, it's terrible, it sucks, it doesn't really impact my life that much. Or you say, I can't really do much about it. You're wrong on both fronts. It will absolutely impact your life. It will impact your quality of life. It will impact your economic prosperity. It will affect the way that your communities look and function. And you are members of the bar. There is nobody better positioned and privileged to do something about this than all of you. So I'll close with that.
Thank you, Anuj. That is really fantastic context, and getting the hard numbers really paints a picture that it's hard to deny. So I appreciate that. Next, we're going to move on to Cathryn Miller-Wilson, the Executive Director of HIAS-PA, who has a unique position of being directly impacted by this in terms of community and as an organization. So Kathy?
Thank you. Before I get into the really terrifying, horrible news, I want to just give you a little bit of context because a lot of people confuse us with HIAS. So HIAS Pennsylvania was founded in 1882 by Jews to rescue Jews from terrorist attacks. We were initially gonna provide what today we would call resettlement services, but the year of our founding, 1882, the original public charge rule was introduced, one of two anti-immigrant laws. The first one was the Chinese Exclusion Act. Despite a lot of protests, because the feeling from the Jewish community was that the public charge rule was aimed at keeping Jews out, because Jews in the 1880s were the poor immigrants who were coming to our shores. Despite those protests, the law passed. The public charge rule still exists today and is one of the many weapons that make it very difficult to come to the United States and make it clear that there is no line. So as a result, we kind of almost immediately pivoted to start advocating, because suddenly all the people that we were trying to provide housing and English lessons for now had to come up against the public charge rule and prove that they wouldn't become dependent wouldn't become a public charge. So we started advocating. The advocacy continued and intensified with Nazi Germany and the rise of Nazism. But 1924, the National Origins Act passed, which slammed the door on immigrants from Europe, including, of course, Jews. So our advocacy work became much more intense. People were desperate to get people out of Nazi Germany. And we did our best. We were able to help some people, and 6 million, we weren't, and they were murdered. So that is something that we have to remember. That is part of our collective responsibility, that we slammed the door at a moment when the world needed us, and 6 million people were killed. So we're in a similar moment right now. HIAS is a national and international organization. It was founded the year before we were in New York City. It was a case of great minds think alike, but since it was before the internet, we didn't know about each other. So they were founded for the same reason, by a group of Jews to rescue Jews from terrorist attacks in Eastern Europe. They grew up, however, taking a different pathway than we did. They have national and international offices to help specifically refugees. And I know the media likes to casually throw around the term refugees. They pretty much call everybody a refugee. The fact is, refugee is a legal term and it's very narrowly defined. So refugees are fleeing persecution by their governments based on one of 5 reasons: politics, religion, ethnicity, nationality, or belonging to a social group. There certainly are more than enough refugees in the world to go around that need our help. So it's wonderful and critical work that HIAS does. But they are not serving the rest of the folks that are under attack. So we are independent from them. We're connected for purposes of refugee resettlement, the way that legal narrow definition is described. We are otherwise independent. So to start off with the horror show, so the refugee resettlement was paused. The program was paused on January 20th. It was supposed to be paused by executive order on January 27th. But immediately after signing the executive order that it was to be paused on January 27th, flights were canceled. So our own staff member, who is an Afghan, had made it here in the first initial wave of Afghans. She had petitioned for her family. It has taken 3 years for them to get clearances. They had a ticket that was to fly them in so they would finally be reunified on January 21st. The ticket was canceled. She doesn't know when she's going to see them again. And a client who was interviewed by Jeff Gamage, because he's very open, similar thing happened to him. He is an SIV. He escaped the Taliban because he helped our military. He got SIV status. He came here. He started working for the State Department. He still works for the State Department. His family is in Pakistan. They had a flight scheduled. Their flight was canceled, and they are going to be deported back to Afghanistan, where they're going to face murder and imprisonment and torture. He has been quoted by Jeff Gamage in the Inquirer as saying, if I can't get them over, I will go back to Afghanistan because at least we'll die together. And this is a man who put his entire life and his family at risk for our military and continues to work for our government. And yet we have abandoned his family. So back to the organizational impact. As a result of the executive orders that shut down the refugee resettlement program, of course, we stopped receiving refugees, but we also stopped receiving payment for the refugees that arrived here before January 20th. We have an obligation in accordance with the cooperative agreement that we signed with the State Department to provide what are called integration services to newly arrived individuals for the first 90 days that they're in country. Now, we're not getting paid for that. We received a stop work order on January 24th, telling us in essence to violate our own obligations under the Resettlement Act and the cooperative agreement. Fortunately for HIAS Pennsylvania, our refugee resettlement program is fairly small. So the number of refugees that we resettled before January 20th was also small. Their 90th day is April 13th. We had an emergency board meeting. We agreed to serve those families until their 90th day using our own funding. But of course, we will not be paid either for the work that is done between now and April or for any other future work, despite it being in our budget, because we were expecting more refugees to come. HIAS National also obviously has been impacted by the closure of the refugee resettlement program and the closure of international humanitarian aid, of which they're a part of. They laid off 250 people nationally and internationally. Now, regardless of who you voted for or how you feel, take a step back. 250 people, plus the thousands of federal employees, plus the hundreds of thousands of nonprofit workers who have been laid off because of the freeze in federal funding, and the pauses, and the various illegal and contra-constitutional things that have been done. How is this helpful to the economy? Our unemployment rates are about to rise really significantly, depression level. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, next, we got a stop work order yesterday for our youth work. We have a federal contract to represent unaccompanied minors who come to this country because they are fleeing abuse, trafficking, violence, starvation. They come by themselves in a desperate attempt to save themselves. There is a federal contract that is provided by the Office of Refugee Resettlement that goes to agencies like ours across the country and provides us with money so that we can provide representation to these unaccompanied minors. We have upwards of 300 open cases that have been pending for years. We've had this contract for a decade or more. We have 4 attorneys working in this space, all of whom are bilingual, and they were told yesterday to stop work. I told them you can't stop work because ethically you've entered your appearance. So they're continuing to represent the kids, but we have no idea how we're going to pay them. That contract is $1.5 million. Today, we got a memo that our citizenship work, the funding is being frozen. There was no explanation. It was sent to spam, so we actually didn't get it in time. That contract is $450,000. So we also are going to be laying off people as soon as we can sort of sort out the caseloads and the obligations that we have. The bottom line, I want to circle back to what everyone has said, but Mary Gay Scanlon said forcefully, and this is really important for anyone in the audience or on the call who may have voted for this president. We understand that the Bar Association holds diverse ideas. No one is trying to say that you should shed your ideas, but if you're a member of the Bar Association, you should care about the rule of law. And these executive orders are illegal. They violate the contract. They violate principles of reliance. They violate the impoundment laws of Congress. All of the federal contracts that we've had for decades, and they have all operated the same way. The other thing to be really clear about is the language in the executive orders. The executive orders try to justify these funding freezes because of potential for waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, to an average taxpayer, that seems like, yeah, that's fine. That makes sense, right? We want to make sure that our taxpayer dollars are being used appropriately. Well, let me tell you, as recipients of federal contracts, our agency has been monitored by the feds 2 times a year, every year for the last 15 years. We have been monitored for, ready? Waste, fraud, and abuse. Every monitoring ends up with a written report. They look at our books, they look at our files, they meet with our clients, they talk to them. And needless to say, despite the fact that we've been monitored twice a year and written reports have been issued, we have been reissued money every year. You know why? Because the finding is 0 waste, 0 fraud, 0 abuse, and that we are doing really good work. So one of the other problems with these executive orders is that they are full of lies. If you are not familiar with this system, as I said, you read the order and it seems not crazy. Okay, we want to monitor how our federal dollars are spent, but it fails to acknowledge that we already are monitoring how our federal dollars expend. So in one swoop, it makes it look like we are running around spending taxpayer dollars doing God knows how what, and that Congress has just been doling it out with no check. And that is absolutely false. So it's really, really important that people understand when they are being snowed. The other thing I wanted to pick up on was Anuj's story, which I really appreciate his sharing. In Jewish tradition, we talk about something called dor lador. That means generation to generation. Immigration is the embodiment of that principle. People come to the United States to make a life for the next generation. And all of us benefit from that. I benefited from my great-grandfather reading the dictionary by candlelight so that he could learn English. And he did it for me, not for him. He did not die wealthy, but he left children and grandchildren who started businesses, who sent me to college. So, and this is every immigrant story, right? This is every story in this country, except for people who were pulled here against their will, descendants of slaves who are oppressed by the own systems that we've created. That's a different story. But the immigrant story is a generation to generation story. And so the rule of law in keeping that story for all of us is critical. And the final note, I brought my prop, I bring it with me everywhere. This is a book. It was written by a Wharton professor on the 100th anniversary of the National Origins Act. It's called The Truth About Immigration. It's about $30 at Macmillan Publishing. Zeke Hernandez wrote it. I have made several offers. If people promise to read it, I will purchase it for them. It has everything you wanted to know. Zeke does a really thorough and easy to read traipse through all the data, including the unfavorable data. He talks about it. He dissects it. He analyzes it. He shows why it is true that immigrants are more important to the future of any country, not just the United States, than ever before. Okay.
Thank you, Kathy. I just have one follow-up question because you have a room full of attorneys and attorneys online. Looking from an organizational perspective, what is it that attorneys can do right now to help you all directly?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I know a lot of attorneys now, and certainly in the first administration, came forward to offer to do pro bono to represent clients. And that was welcome and it was needed. The reality of this moment, though, and Jonathan alluded to this, it's really, really complicated. I mean, my attorneys can be in the middle of writing a petition that they've written 1,000 times before, and they get an email from the Department of Justice that you can no longer do this and now you have to do that. So we can't really use people who are not experienced in immigration law because it's really just too big an ask. However, in this moment, we, and I would venture to say all the nonprofits in this city desperately need pro bono attorneys to defend us as agencies. I just described to you 3 federal funding pauses. And so we really need somebody who will represent us. I've already gotten Duane Morris and blank Rome because I've been having panic attacks for the last 3 weeks. So I already lined people up, but for HIAS-PA, but other agencies need it as well. And I've been on calls. I've been sort of surprised. I think it's because I'm a lawyer and there are other nonprofit EDs who are not lawyers, where they say, well, we can't afford a lawyer. And I look at them like, are you crazy? Ask your pro bono bar, So we, nonprofits need lawyers to help them. So, yeah.
Thank you. And that is for everyone in the room and online to take note and to listen, because that's an important point that I wanted to make sure we didn't miss. But moving on to Kat Voit from Duane Morris. Tell us a little bit about perspective about what pro bono areas attorneys can do in another context.
In another outside of immigration?
Well,
I'm going
no.
to challenge, and Kathy knows that I'm doing this. So I'm going to respectfully challenge and push a little because I have been for a couple months now, because that's my job. So I am pro bono counsel at Duane Morris. I run our global pro bono program and practice humanitarian immigration law. We, amongst all our pro bono activities, give around nearly 10,000 hours in pro bono to immigrants, hundreds of immigrant families here in Philly and across the US every year. So we have a huge immigration pro bono practice that my colleague and I lead. So like I said, that's partially part of my job. And so I'm in some ways your call to action that Kathy alluded to at the beginning of this event today of what can you do, and looking at this room and the folks online. I know a good majority of you are probably immigration lawyers, and that's why you're here, because you care and you want to learn more. But looking across this room, I know many of you, but I don't know all of you, which means there's a fair bet that you aren't immigration lawyers or pro bono lawyers, because if you were, I would know you already. So taking up the kind of rule of law mantle here, when I was thinking about this and like my call to action pitch, if you were here around it, I was familiarizing myself with some stats, and I'm not going to even try to compete against Anuj's story, because how you get people to do pro bono is you share the impact in the stories, and I can't compete with that, except to say if you take a pro bono case in any realm, including immigration, I am more than confident that that's the sort of experience you'll have, and it will help motivate you and fuel you to do your work both in your billable practice and in the pro bono space tenfold. What you've given to your pro bono client. But if that's not enough, the context at which we look at this immigration conundrum, I could come up with stronger verbiage, but we'll leave it at that. Today, is in an already broken system, right? So if we're talking about rule of law, our immigration system has been broken for years and decades, as was stated. There hasn't been immigration reform in several decades. And on the humanitarian side, where I practice and where most of the pro bono work is, because if you're on the billable side, where we started out at the beginning of the table, your employer is probably paying for my colleagues' services in our billable immigration practice at the firm. But if you're on the humanitarian side, where you're seeking pro bono, you're talking more about the refugee, the SIJS, VAWA, U visas as victim of immigrant crime or victims of crime, things like that. And there's a good chance you are already in removal proceedings and deportation proceedings. So looking at that system and where we were at the beginning of this year, before going into the Trump administration, there were 3.7 million cases before the Executive Office of Immigration Review at the end of 2024. And there were 700 immigration judges. We've read in the news about 24 have been laid off in the past couple weeks, including the most recent roster of judges that were slated to begin this year. The math there is that each judge would need to hear about 500 to 700 cases a year. Clearly, that's not necessarily feasible. And then before USCIS, if you're proceeding with one of those cases affirmatively, you aren't already in deportation proceedings. There are 1 million asylum cases pending right now as well, end of fiscal year 2023, and several million more of all the other panoply of immigration cases. So this is a broken system that has been broken, you know, depending on which client of mine, we're waiting somewhere between 5 to 7 years for you to have an interview before USCIS, 2, 3, maybe more years for you to have your asylum hearing before the Executive Office of Immigration Review. So this is like a broken system from a rule of law of people who have gone through all the horrors that have already been, you know, shared today. The worst things you can imagine have ended up here just seeking safety and security and to work hard and, you know, take care of their families. And they're in this broken system where they can't just apply and then get help and get security and safety. And it's only going to get immeasurably worse, as Kathy stated. So what can we do to try to fix the system, or what can we do as lawyers to do our part to try to assist fellow community members? Some more statistics, if you care. I like statistics. You can ask anybody at my firm, and I love stats. I love slicing and dicing stats. So first of all, it's been tested and analyzed. A detained immigrant, so somebody who's in detention, is 2 times more likely to obtain relief if they have an attorney than if they don't. And a non-detained immigrant is 5 times more likely to obtain relief and be able to stabilize their status here in the US. That said, according to Vecino, which is like an immigration policy think tank, of the 9,500 immigration attorneys and accredited representatives in the US, around 3,300 no deportation defense. So in this moment, there's a huge gap of people that need our services. And a lot of them, if you're in humanitarian proceedings, you might be one of the people that was described at the beginning of the table, but you also probably are seeking humanitarian relief of some sort, and you fled and you left everything and you're trying to rebuild. And you might need some pro bono assistance to do that because you might not be flush with cash or have work authorization yet to go hire that attorney. And that's where we can think about what can we do as a bar, as a community, as lawyers, to provide this sort of assistance, both to facilitate and support our community members, but also to continue this rule of law and try to provide representation in this messed up system that is constantly changing by the day, like Kathy said. And I will totally affirm that it is not an easy area of law to practice in these days. So what can you do? And I've been thinking about this both because Kathy's challenged me on it, and Debbie Gross and others, of what can you do, particularly as we're kind of in this wait and see moment of, we know bad's coming, but lots of people haven't, thank God, been detained yet. There's still that need every day that's been there for years and years to support and assist pro bono in our communities. But there's tons that we can do, and you don't have to be a litigator. You don't have to be comfortable going to immigration court. I work with folks across my firm all the time who are not litigators, who are corporate attorneys. My bankruptcy attorneys love to practice immigration law. My only theory there is that it's a special court, and so they're used to it, and it's comforting that it's a body of law they can learn, just like bankruptcy. That's my armchair psychology thought. But you can learn this. You're successful lawyers. You can pick up this body of law, and if you're willing to roll up your sleeves, you can learn it. And we need to do that because our immigration legal aids are overwhelmed. They're at their capacity already, and they're losing their funding. So beyond giving money to help pay for attorneys, at their legal aids to keep doing this critical work. You know, I think this is a moment where the bar, and I've been talking with Debbie and Kathy about this, how can we think creatively to meet the moment, to come up with other pro bono projects, avenues like the bar has done the first time Trump was elected, et cetera, to help meet this moment. So that's kind of like a stay tuned, it's coming. Kathy alluded to that, and there are going to be more. But thinking of how, like through the AILA Pro Bono Committee or through firms like mine who have experienced immigration attorneys, how can we help meet this moment and serve as mentor attorneys so that the folks at HIAS and NSC aren't having to mentor while they're dealing with everything that Kathy just described, and help, you know, meet the needs in our communities. So to that extent, it's not an area you can dabble in, but what can you do now? You can roll up your sleeves, you can get trained. There are a plethora of trainings on the bar's website, on PBI, on PLI, all the different law firms around the city, big law firms are holding trainings on this, my colleagues and I, so you can get trained. And I would just say, if you're committing to do work in this space, commit to it. Like, don't dabble in it and then ask somebody to help or ask somebody at HIAS. Like, do the reading, do the training, do the work. You can learn it, I promise. And then, and to that end, get yourself trained on particularly, and where my firm is going, and we'll be happy to share these materials, is around removal defense, because that's coming. That's the next wave, right? And cancellation, because a lot of the people that are probably going to be picked up have been in the country for decades, can't adjust because something horrible hasn't happened to them, thank goodness. They might be married to a US citizen, but you can't adjust on that if you entered without inspection in the US because of the broken system. So cancellation cases, which is an extraordinary form of relief that I think is going to pick up as an area of practice that isn't done as much, except in that small immigration deportation defense bar. And then Kathy stole my show of, if you're a corporate lawyer or a litigator, or you like class actions, there's a lot that needs to be done. And through the Law Firm Pro Bono Committee, we're working to establish and try to figure out some way, and would love to hear from you how we can support all of our nonprofits, legal aids or otherwise, across the city as they have, you know, stop work orders, funding issues. We've heard about nonprofit IRS tax exempt status potentially being pulled, all of those sorts of things. And so would love to hear from you if you have interest in helping in those areas, because there's going to be a huge need. I learned from Kathy last week that we have more nonprofits in Philadelphia than for-profits. So this is like a huge issue, back to Anuj and just our, you know, our income and our livelihood and our success of our city. And so, yeah, so there are so many ways you can get involved, and please reach out to me, the bar, et cetera, to do so.
So before we move on, a couple questions for the panel. First, one of the things that Representative Scanlon talked about, right, was one of the purposes of these executive actions is to make life so hard that people self-deport. And I think one of the areas that we see that also is preventing people without status from accessing the court. So what can we as attorneys serving these communities do to make sure that people without status have access to the court and aren't afraid to come to court?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, because I meant to follow up and then got distracted. So first, to be very, very clear about this self-deportation, it's this ongoing lie about who particularly asylum seekers are. The point of seeking asylum is because you were persecuted. So you're not going to self-deport. You're going to do exactly what is already happening, hole up in your house. And it's happening all over. I mean, I have a friend who's on the school board in Bucks County, and she said, hey, like, what's going on? The teachers are reporting that none of the immigrant kids are coming to school. And I said, yeah, well, have you read the newspaper? So. Also, I'm a member of the Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, and another member, I was prepared to raise my hand, but thankfully I didn't have to, said, hey, you know, we need to do something as a chamber, because businesses are reporting not only that their workers aren't coming, but their customers aren't coming. And they're facing closure of their business, small business, because suddenly, like, customers stopped coming. So this is a real thing. So access to the courts, it's obviously a huge problem. And we have had reports of people being picked up when they go to their ICE check-in. Excuse me, which is an example of someone who's trying to comply with the immigration law, which says that when you have an appointment with ICE, you're supposed to keep it. Well, they're not going to keep it if they know they're going to get detained. So yeah, I mean, the biggest advice we can give is to try to see if you can ask the court for a remote hearing, which is something that a lot of courts have been willing to do. And so then you can participate remotely and you don't have to leave your home. The other thing is, obviously, if you have a lawyer, it's better because the lawyer will be on the spot. But as we just heard from Kat, there's very few people that have lawyers. And then the other thing is the know your rights. I mean, we, along with everybody else, have been providing tons and tons and tons of know your rights trainings around the city. And one of the things that we've said is, look, you don't have to talk. So if you go to show up for your hearing and you end up getting approached by an ICE officer, you just don't talk. Don't be mean. Don't be violent. Don't respond to the questions. And if your non-responsiveness allows you to get into the courtroom, great. If it doesn't, at least you've protected yourself because you've kept silent. I mean, it's the same thing as if you say anything, it can and you will be used against you. So you don't have to talk.
I have one more question before passing it back to the Chancellor, which is, right, we've talked a lot about, actions on the federal level. But what are the things that state and local government can do to address some of the issues that we've been talking about today?
So on the local side, and probably everybody in this room has heard some version of this, there's been newspaper headlines. So let me do a quick detour about sanctuary cities. That's a total misnomer. Neither Philadelphia nor anybody else in the country is a sanctuary, okay? What they're talking about is a city that agrees that they're not going to detain somebody without a judicial warrant. Plain and simple. They're just going to follow the law. So that has been true in this city since Lehigh County lost thousands of dollars for not following the law in 2014. And then it was kind of reinforced by an executive order signed by Mayor Kenney. Mayor Parker has said quietly that she's not changing anything. That order still stands and, we will insist on judicial warrants and, make sure everybody's following the law. The problem is, as things are escalating on the federal government side in terms of officers feeling empowered to, kind of go in anywhere, be bullying, be demanding, there is a lot of fear that unless the mayor will come out and make a strong statement, there will be rogue police officers who, agree with the policy of, round them up. And, they will be violating the law. They will be violating their own oath. Nevertheless, say that to the person who's held in a jail cell. Not too comforting. So on the local side, it would be great if city council and the mayor would stand up loudly and say, look, this is the law. It's been the law. It's going to continue to be the law. And any officer who violates that, any Philadelphia police officer who violates that will be punished, will be suspended, will be fined, et cetera, whatever powers they have. On the state level, I think the governor has gone a long way by suing the administration about the funding, because doing that, although it's about state funding, it sends a message, look, I'm going to stand up for the rule of law. I'm not going to stand for this. So that has been reassuring. The governor has also said, but again, not in a very loud way, that the state troopers have been advised, you have to follow the law. Judicial warrant. And, it would be better if that were louder, but the lawsuit speaks volumes to that. Other kinds of things, I know there's a bill in my inbox, a proposed state law that, to be honest, I didn't have a chance to read, so I don't know what it's about. But I know that there's another proposal that is trying to strengthen U visas. So U visas are the visas that are available to victims of crime. If they cooperate, right now what the law says is if you cooperate with law enforcement and law enforcement certifies that cooperation, you're eligible to apply for a U visa. One of the problems is the certification process is discretionary. So all of the time we have law enforcement refusing to certify, even though we have lots of evidence, clients who've gone all over. So there's a proposal that Joe Hohenstein made to strengthen that, to take discretion away. So that would be something that would be helpful, but that's one little piece.
I'm gonna go to Anuj and then to our Chancellor to close.
Yeah, I just want to expand upon what Kathy is saying and what specifically local government can do. And two things you need to understand. During Trump 1, the foreign-born population in Philadelphia actually continued to increased year over year from 17 through 2020. Number two, in 2019, about a year and a half before he left office, Philadelphia was certified as the largest welcoming city in the United States. It's a title that we still hold. That is not one synonymous with sanctuary city, nor is it just a fluff credential. It was actually a rigorous process. A credentialing organization called Welcoming America came here and spent, Peter, 2 weeks? 2 weeks studying all kinds of aspects of the city and NGO ecosystem through which we support immigrant communities. It's things like ensuring the city services are available irrespective of language proficiency. It's things like investing in immigrant job seekers who are looking to integrate themselves in the local economy. It's providing professionalized English language instruction, not just volunteer circles at the free library branches. All of that is still something that the city can do, not asking the mayor or council or anybody else to stand in the way of armed federal agents. And it is doubling down on what our ethos should be as a city. We need to make sure that our elected officials here are continuing to adhere to those commitments.
Thank you. And thank you to the panel.
I just wanted to make one more point, in case anybody is sitting there and thinking about what you can do still, if you're not sure what ways that you can make an impact. And Kat mentioned this briefly, but the good old fashioned way of just providing donations, providing support directly to organizations is what you can do. And you can do that today, you can do that tomorrow, and you can get others to do that as well. Because we heard a lot about federal funding being cut, state funding being cut, and limitations on what organizations can do. And if we want those organizations to survive beyond the legal support that we can provide as a community, we can give them our dollars. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much to the panel. Thank you all for your time, your expertise, and your devotion to this work. And I'll pass it back to the Chancellor.
Okay. So I do have to start by saying that as a first-generation American with parents who started out in New York, so I was born in New York and my sister was born in New York. We moved here when I was 6 months old because Philadelphia is a welcoming city. And so being a first-generation American and listening to our representative, each of these panelists, I am touched, moved, and inspired by being in this room and being with you all. So please thank our representative, Scanlon, again. Please thank each of our speakers, Anuj, Jonathan, Kathy, Kat, moderated by Vic and Brian, and for all of the hard work on putting this on. I want to thank all of the online attendees. They are still with us strong. Thank you. If you are here in person, please join us for some light refreshments to gather and continue to engage with each other. And please consider joining us for future events and initiatives as part of this series. In the current environment where we have limited opportunity to impact on what is taking place at a national level, I have faith in those in Washington, D.C., like we heard from today. We feel it is imperative to act locally to make a difference. We are planning virtual and in-person gatherings of those interested in immigration. The first one will be Friday, February 28th from 2:30 to 3:30 virtually. So again, we'll be able to continue the conversation, find ways to help. This is not the end of the conversation. We have already planned our next program, which will be around the federal funding freezes that will impact our community and nonprofits and how we can support the philanthropic community to help alleviate the crisis to come. It will be held on March 25th. If you're interested at Deckert, thank you, Deckert, for providing the place. If you're interested in that, please join us. If you know others who are interested in that, please join us. We hope you will join us in these efforts to meet the moment in 2025. Thank you all so much.